Welcome, everyone, to Understanding the Human Condition with your host, Dr. James Flowers.
Hey, Robin, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Well, I'm super excited. Today we have a co-host with us.
We do?
A third. It's a triad today.
You got two blondes on the show.
We have Dr. Louise Stenger with us co-hosting. Thank you for joining us as a co-host.
My goodness, it's my pleasure, my honor. I'm so excited to be here and to...
Well, our special guest,
a fellow Californian,
Adam Swanson of Lido Wellness Center, is zooming in.
Hey, Adam.
Hi, nice to see you guys.
Nice to see you. Thanks so much for doing this with us today.
So I wanted to just do a little quick intro, and then we'll go into some more and have a good conversation here. Adam is a primary therapist at Lido Wellness Center. His goal is to bring into focus barriers preventing patients from thriving and to help them cultivate their own abilities to overcome challenges. So let's see how he can help us.
Yeah. Adam, tell us about, first of all, tell me about yourself. Tell me about your background and a little bit about you.
Sure, yeah. Well, I am a California native, so I was born and raised in LA County in Burbank. I'm like a suburb of LA. But so oddly enough, I fell in love with surfing. It's like been my pastime, my passion since I was 10 years old. And so I always wanted to get to the beach. So I got myself to the beach, moved here. And then kind of, not to give the whole backlog history, but kind of was a late bloomer in regard to figuring out what I wanted to do in this life and what my career was going to be. And kind of, you get asked that question a lot of like, why'd you become a therapist, right? Like kind of what led you to it, right? And I almost felt tripped up sometimes with that question. And then finally I came to that place of just accepting like the answer is I just followed a hunch.
Yeah.
Just intuitively was like, I think this is something I can do and will be good at. And it was that experience of, I remember my first day of, our graduate program, it was just like that confirmation where I was like, I never really liked school that much. I was never like the bookworm. And so school was always just, I had to do it. And then I remember the first day of my program, it was like, this is like nothing I've ever experienced. Like I love this. I'm interested. I was motivated. And so that just like lit that fire. And from then on, it was game on in regard to kind of becoming a therapist and doing this work. And so kind of career-wise, I suppose, I got my start like a lot of us therapists do interning kind of in the nonprofit sector, working with a lot of families and like younger children. That kind of segued into getting into the addiction field, working with substance abuse treatment. I suspect a lot of therapists in Southern California in specific will often kind of fall into that almost because it's such like this kind of mecca of treatment, especially for substance abuse in Southern California. And so I worked in that for years. And then of course, kind of did my own practice on the side, working with a lot of adolescents. I've always really enjoyed that work with adolescents because I think in some ways I kind of do have that Peter Pan syndrome where I think I always question, like, do I really want to grow up? So like, you work with adolescents and it's just, you can be kind of like them for that session, and be authentically like there with them. So I like that work. And then I've been, here at Lido Wellness working with primary mental health for the last about coming up on like kind of 2 years. And that's just really been fascinating and eye-opening for me from coming from more of that, the addiction kind of field and how to segue some of that into more primary mental health, the similarities, the differences.
Yeah.
It's been like a pure kind of learning experience for me to be working here for the last couple of years and really enjoy that. I love working with, again, I guess the best description of what I really love working with is relationships and like kind of particularly like codependency issues, but on an individual level, like working with the individual to help them kind of navigate that. Because I think in some ways it's like, it's kind of that notion, give me the one family member, right, who like actually is willing to do something about changing this family system. Right. And I love just digging into that. So that's kind of the work I most enjoy doing.
That's so cool. I can't wait to hear more about Lido Wellness. We have a few things in common. I was a late bloomer as well. It took me a while to finish undergraduate school. I had way too much fun in undergraduate school. I loved my program. My undergraduate degree is actually in marketing and finance. And I loved that, doing that. but I knew that I wanted to do something else, and that's when I kind of went in the direction of psychology and counseling. But that kind of expanded the time it took to graduate. But yeah, and then the other connection we have is Lisa Jane Vargas, which is why we're here together today. And I used to work with Lisa Jane out in Arizona, and I consider her a great colleague and a very good friend. And she's an amazing person in the field that we're all in together around the country. So, Lisa Jane, thanks for. I know you're out there listening, Lisa. So thanks for introducing us and making this happen today. So yeah, kudos to you. So I'd love to know more about Lido Wellness. Tell us about what Lido does, and then the follow-up question is, or actually the first question before you tell us about Lido, if you don't mind. Tell me, you were just talking about moving from addiction into mental health, right? And what that transition was like, because it is different. Sometimes it's very similar, obviously. We see people with comorbid addiction and mental health. Sometimes we see pure addiction, and sometimes which rare, and then sometimes we see mental health with no addiction. So what was that experience like for you, and how do you see those two differing?
Yeah, so the experience for me again was very exciting again at the front end, because I think I had, like I was saying, a lot of, and that's why I say a lot of, and I include myself and a lot of therapists, you kind of just almost stumble into that field originally with kind of, again, the substance abuse, not having, not recovering myself. So it's like, that was this huge learning experience of and of itself. But then I always kind of had that lurking suspicion, like, I wonder what it would be like, to work with just primary mental health. I shouldn't say just, but just primary mental health. And so I was excited about it. And it really was just kind of, I think maybe surprisingly similar, where there was a lot of similarities in just the therapy I was doing.
Right.
And that might be more indicative of how I do therapy, where, I think when working in substance abuse, it was almost like I just naturally, it wasn't like addressed head on, the substance abuse. It was almost like it would always be this kind of back channel, right, of looking at the mental health was the kind of, right, as we all know, like would usually drive the substance abuse in many ways. So I kind of was already doing that, I suspect, without even really putting my finger on it, that I was working with the primary mental health in a way. And that would then in turn kind of, again, fuel the recovery, if you will, from addiction. And then, so I think that's why I was almost like kind of surprised at how not different my therapy sessions felt.
Right.
Working with, a primary substance abuse client versus working with a primary mental health abuse. I think the difference is, and again, it's hard to tease out of, was it just difference between the populations or the just facilities in particular, but I definitely notice, I would almost call it like an advantage of the mental health kind of field, or working with that, is there seems to be a stronger kind of commitment, engagement, and motivation. Versus with addiction, there seems to be kind of these almost like built-in resistances to it, in almost like kind of a stronger way. Part of, and again, I'm speaking in generalities, there's always the outliers that kind of cross over and change, but there would just be a little bit more of that, resistance, where you can almost feel, the presence of kind of the guard up, because I suspect it had been, especially by the time they'd arrived in treatment, and especially clients, there seems to be a lot more repeat treatment episodes with that kind of population, where that's what I think in a way reinforces that resistance at times. So I would notice that was like one of the big differences I noticed, was just a far more kind of a greater motivation, openness to engage, versus some of those, again, almost unconscious resistance and kind of guards that I would come across.
Right.
Again, more working in mental health, there seems to, I was about to say it seems to be more family involvement, but maybe that might just kind of be pretty equal. The interesting thing, I think there's kind of a particular challenge working with mental health primary, where when you're working with substance abuse primary, it's almost like there's this inevitable, right? Like with substance abuse, there's the thing. There's this objective, actual, existing outside of the person thing, the substance, right? that I think both the client, the patient, the family, like can almost like point to, and it's almost more tangible, if you will. There's more measurable goals. It's more like, have you remained sober for a month? 2 months? It's like there's this kind of easy, if you will, like goal to work toward, right? There's almost like that tangible thing where with primary mental health, that's kind of gone in some ways, right? It's all internal.
Right.
It's how do you measure the progress when it's all just subjective report of the internal experience in a way. You could probably find some objective kind of measures, but it's not as easy. It's not that, again, that just glaringly big, obvious substance, right? It is the thing
Right.
outside of them. So that's been my experience of kind of the differences and similarities.
Yeah. And then segueing into talking about primary mental health, tell us about Lido and what you guys do at Lido.
Yeah. So Lido, this place has been like, I can only kind of sing its praises.
Good.
It's like I know the context of what we're talking about, and I'm always very insecure about coming across inauthentic, but it really is like the team of people here, the way in which they approach really comprehensive treatment, right, where you get like a really wraparound team of clinicians, and just kind of the almost abundance of therapists. And so I've joked about it with kind of the leadership and the ownership of like, it's 2 years and I'm waiting for like the monster to come out of the closet, right? Of like, what's the catch here, right? Of like how you guys are able to kind of have such like a collaborative, compassionate team where none of the staff are overworked. It's completely very manageable caseloads. Again, it's pretty trauma focused is kind of what I would say is kind of like our specialty. And so, every client, every patient who comes gets essentially a team, right, of therapists, where you have kind of your primary therapist, which I am typically, who kind of is, again, more of like the generalist, if you will, and kind of treats the whole spectrum. And then you get a specialist, right, in trauma. And you're doing somatic experiencing or EMDR, and you're getting that team, and having that kind of focus has been where I haven't experienced that much other places, where we really do, again, focus on that collaboration and kind of team approach, and kind of making sure and you get a family therapist.
Sure.
Yeah.
So like you get that piece in there as well.
Yeah.
So Adam, I'm bursting with questions. They know that.
Yeah.
And but before I ever start, I need to tell you I love the fact that you talked about surfing, because our family actually helped start the first water surfing school in the United States for women called Surf Diva, which is now celebrated its 30th year at the Hoya Shores. So, anybody that can ride a wave, or I think we do life-saving work. But I guess when we asked about Lido, I just really want to know, how big is it? How many beds do you have? And in a perfect world, what would be your ideal client? Because obviously I have ability to either talk to people or refer to people all over the world. So tell me what age range or how big. That would be so helpful, I think, to all the listeners of J Flowers as well.
Yeah, for all the moms listening. Yeah.
So we're I would kind of identify us as on the smaller side, but with purpose, right? So it's a more intimate setting, and we're an outpatient program, so we don't have residential, right? We work with kind of partnered facilities for that piece when we need to refer out, or when they're referring for like aftercare. So we have a PHP and IOP program. For those of you who don't know the treatment language, right? That's either basically a full day of programming, usually about 6 hours a day versus 3 hours a day. And it's kind of this nice titration, right, of treatment down. And so, we have a mix of clients who are local, and again, starting with us at that kind of outpatient level. Some of our clients are coming from a residential program, and so they're doing that kind of the next phase of treatment. And some are out of state, so we do, again, have supportive housing. So it's, not residential, but it's supportive housing, where you have some oversight, you have some accountability and supervision even within the housing component, but you're still coming to your treatment. We believe in that kind of healthy, somewhat, like you want some collaboration between those two entities, but you also want to acknowledge that this is a next phase of treatment. So you want to kind of get to more freedoms and, responsibilities. So you want a little bit of that separation at the same time.
Yeah.
So really we're looking at, again, a simultaneous, totally separate PHP program and IOP running at the same time. And really we try to hold to that kind of golden number of 8 people in a group. So there's been times where we've had to kind of split off and, split our IOP. So we might have 2 IOP programs running and 1 PHP. And that should give you a kind of idea of the numbers of how big we are, right?
Sure.
So again, pretty small, more intimate. And you get, I think that's kind of our forte, if you will, of like, we keep it small. We want to keep it to where you're not coming into this giant facility and like these big groups where you have kind of that space to either kind of hide, or the defense mechanisms can just run amok.
Yeah.
Like you have that oversight. And again, there's just so much staff around. It's very much like that very strong, I don't know the numbers of the client to staff ratio, but it's especially for clinical credentialed staff, the client ratio, right, is very strong, where there's so many clinician therapists.
Yeah. What's the mental health diagnosis range of diagnoses that you guys treat at Lido?
Sure. So we treat like a pretty, the kind of your it sounds weird to say, but like your typical diagnoses, right? Which is going to fall in again in post-traumatic stress disorder, right? Major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety. And we're comfortable kind of extending into that range of the more acute, I would kind of call diagnosis, right? Where there might be an eating disorder underlining. Again, there may be even, a psycho effect, or some degree of psychosis has maybe recently occurred, or there might even be some psychotic kind of features presenting themselves. But so long as the patient is stable and there is not necessarily a crisis situation, or it feels like those symptoms are almost kind of swinging around and sabotaging the treatment progress, we're comfortable kind of managing that as well. And again, I would say our kind of particular niche is more of the trauma piece and kind of really working with that. And then I think you had mentioned kind of the ideal client, patient, which is such a good question to ask. Our mission statement, to kind of paraphrase it, is essentially like, we want to be the last treatment facility that you go to.
Yep.
I think, it's definitely been my observation. I'm sure your guys' is, and it was definitely the observation of our leadership team, where we would see so many patients kind of, you almost get caught in the cycle of treatment, right? Where it's kind of just treatment episode after treatment episode. And so I think that's why we pay particular attention to keeping, again, that small kind of setting with a wraparound team to kind of catch those pieces that have been missed, perhaps in the previous treatment episodes. And that's what we really aim to do. So the patient, the client that we really seek is, again, that one who's just, they're fed up, right? Or they can't figure out why they keep getting their own way, right? Well, I've done this 3 times, 5 times over of doing the same, right? I keep getting caught in it. So that's kind of our ideal client. And, their age range, it's really, I wouldn't say targeted, right? We get anywhere from very young adults who's kind of, they're really stagnated in developing and kind of launching right into adulthood. Sure. That's like, I love working with that. And then we'll have all the way up to the kind of the other types of phase of life transitions, right? Where it's maybe the parents who are kind of facing the whole empty nest, syndrome, and kind of on that almost transitioning out of the work life phase of life. So any kind of phase of life transition, it's almost like that's, from that phase of life into adulthood and that phase of life into almost retirement, like that phase is where all the stuff starts manifesting. So, it's a wide range, but yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Tell us about codependency within the families that you work with, and how you work with codependency.
Yeah. Yeah, codependency has been one of those things that it's really interested me since obviously coming from like the world of substance abuse treatment, where that term was even born out of, right? Um, I just, I think, again, not being in recovery myself, being kind of immersed in that kind of world, if you will, that's what really struck me as just so interesting and tragic
Yeah.
about kind of how it unfolds with family systems and how you have, these parents or these spouses or whoever the family members are, right, who are kind of surrounding the person suffering from addiction. It turns into, again, what I call like a paradox. I think that word, I don't know if I'm using the word right, but we're going to just go with it.
There you go.
So I'll call it a paradox of
Yeah.
there's so much love and care kind of being poured out and so much kind of protective reactions to fear that come in and do the kind of classic rescuing the person from essentially facing the natural consequences of the actions that ensue when addiction takes hold. And I think the question that everyone has and like no one can answer is like, when does that become reinforcing of the addiction itself? Right? When does the kind of consistent coming in, rescuing, allowing the person to, again, not essentially face kind of the, right, in that world, it's called like the rock bottom, right? Of, is that perpetuating it? Is that just creating more time and space for the miracle to happen? That is a horrific question to wrestle with as a parent, right? When you have a child, or again, you have a spouse who is absolutely suffering, and yet, you really have to, you're kind of, I guess you're working on two like extremely powerful drives in the human body, right? Like, especially when it's a parent, there's an instinctual drive to protect our offspring at all costs.
Yeah.
There's an instinctual drive to protect ourselves from pain. And so you picture the parent who's sitting there and they know their addicted child is out there and they know that they have rescued them time after time after time, and nothing's getting better. And they've gone to Al-Anon, they've gone to therapists who say you can't let them back in the house. We'll keep it as simple as that example, right? You can't let them back in. You let them back in, this whole thing resets.
Right.
And so you have a parent, I always picture the parent sitting there, they know their child is out there on the street and they're facing all the dangers that entails, and yet they have to fight both of those instincts, right? To protect them and bring them in, and also to alleviate their fear. To sit there for a whole night and know they can't let them back in, but sit with that level of fear about the child. Again, that's the self-protection of their own pain. That no one wants to experience that kind of pain of knowing that could happen to their child. And so those are powerful drives to try to get in and start to like literally, you have to do a counterintuitive thing and set the boundary, right? However that boundary might look. And so working with parents on that, for whatever reason, it draws me in, because I think of the empathy I feel for the parents and the family, that I don't know that many people like understand the depth of that paradox and the depth of the difficulty.
That's right.
Of what it is to pull back and set the boundaries in that loving way. And how do you do that? And how do you square that even with your own morality and your value system? It's so counterintuitive.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Children, go ahead.
So I think that what you're saying is so well. I think that families, in my mind, do the best that they can do with the resources they have. And when they come to see someone like you or Lido or experience it, they learn how to do better. I think when I think of mental health, and you didn't mention that you specialize, or maybe Lido does or doesn't, probably the closest thing when you're bridging talking about addiction is, you all know Randy Kruger, stop walking on eggshells. Because I don't know a family, and I do agree with you on one thing, Adam, families love, they enjoy if their loved one has a mental health problem. It is so much more palatable because they haven't done, the disease hasn't taken them out, they haven't lied, they haven't cheated, they haven't stole money. And so it becomes, sometimes they're just really relieved.
And sometimes
say
they'd
that.
rather have a mental health
Health
diagnosis
diagnosis than they
a
would.
substance use disorder.
But when you think about, stop walking on eggshells, because both people with mental health and addiction or substance use disorders, I've found, and I'm sure you do too, they're walking on eggshells and they don't know what to do. And they've done what they believe is the best they can do. And maybe your role, which I'm so excited that you're so passionate about working with family, is to teach them new strategies and skills.
Yeah. Yeah.
Totally right. And I think that's been the somewhat unique challenge, because I remember when I was segueing into working with primary mental health, I was curious about like, how is this whole codependency piece going to manifest, or how are we going to treat it here? Because again, we don't have the tangible substance to almost kind of be the enemy, right? It kind of almost in a way, you don't have that kind of advantage, if you will, in a way, right? Like there's this almost different way it can manifest. It's either good in regard to, again, there isn't that same stigma, there isn't the same kind of bridges burnt, if you will.
Yep.
But also there are times where it might not be a substance, but there's been, again, maybe it's like the personality features of a disorder, right? That kind of play into behaviors that totally push people away and totally burn bridges. But it's just more difficult to deal with, because it's like those boundaries get a little more difficult to kind of instruct on. But I love what you're saying, Lisa, about the walk on eggshells, because that's such a good example of like how boundaries might look a little different, where with addiction, it's a little more clear cut of don't rescue. But when it comes to a family system where there's a mental health issue, and again, maybe it's a more of a personality feature, even, where the boundary is no, like we can't bite your tongue anymore around this, right? Every step along the way, you have to stop and say, this is not okay the way you were addressing me, right? Or this is not okay what you're saying to me, right? Like holding your personal boundaries and saying, basically, no more walking on the eggshells. I as a parent or the spouse, like I'm going to not shy around reality anymore.
Excuse me.
And I guess one variable which we do have with mental health is, I'm sure if you're the last resort, so I'm sure you're busy creating scaffolding, but medication management is really a key indicator of mental health. People who don't want to take their medicine, who don't see that, and that's where they run into some kinds of problems, and they probably end up back at Lido.
Or take it until they feel better.
Or take it until they feel better. And then I'm all better and I don't need it. I can go sup down the Amazon or surf somewhere.
Well, Adam, it sounds like you guys are doing an absolutely amazing job at Lido. And did you want to say?
Well, we're running out of time here, so I just wanted to.
Oh my gosh, that's so fast.
I know.
That's so fast. But I had a couple of fun questions that I thought I'd ask you just to find out about Adam the man, not Adam the therapist. But what's your happy place? Where is it? Where are you? Where is it?
So I guess I think of two, like real happy place is just like my home, right? Like my family. I have,
I love that.
and my wife and my two young kids who I go home and I love, my son's 6, my daughter's 3. I love just being on the floor and I just turn in my favorite thing to do is just sit on the floor and just be a jungle gym to them. And they love just wrestling with me and climbing all over me. Like my wife always jokes about it, like Dad's just the jungle gym, right? Like I just love being on the floor.
Oh, I love that.
Crawl all over and, all kinds of that. So that's like my happiest spot probably. And then kind of the imaginary like happy place is the ocean, surfing.
Sure. Surfing.
For me, if I go, right, or I just want to, be present and, even imagining it just is a happy place for me.
Right. Absolutely.
What about music? What music do you have on your playlist right now? Has it changed since COVID?
No, music's an interesting one for me because I've never been like the music guy where I go like looking for and I have all these playlists built out. It's much more like just some music emotionally resonates or not. And so I believe it or not, music I like to listen to that kind of inspires me is like movie scores. I love listening to like composers, like Hans Zimmer is one of my favorites. And there's something about that magic kind of just inspirational score that I actually
Sure.
just I'll put that on and I'll listen to that while I work or while I'm driving home. And then I like more of your kind of modern, kind of rock, folksy kind of bands and stuff too.
Yeah.
Cool.
Very cool.
So, if someone wants to contact you, there's a mother or a father or a family member right now who's been listening or watching, how would they contact you?
Or contact Lido.
Lido.
Sure. So yeah,
Yeah.
probably. I mean, the
Thank you.
easiest probably way, right, especially with this stage, is just the virtual, right, with the websites.
Yep.
Okay.
So LidoWellnessCenter.com is
All right.
for Lido, and then for my own practice, it's just AdamSwansonMFT.com.
Got it.
Perfect.
Those are
Nice.
the
Awesome.
most, because the website, right, kind of builds out all the other contacts, right? You can find my phone number on there. You can contact me directly. Same with Lido.
Yep.
The phone number to admissions is there. It's all kind of built in. So that'd be the easiest way to contact.
That's great.
Perfect.
Well, we love the work that you guys are doing at Lido Wellness, and we wish you guys all the greatest success. Louise is going to come
Thank
out
you.
and see you guys.
Yes,
Yeah.
so excited to meet you, and you know,
Yeah,
if
I'm
you.
excited too.
So I look forward to actually meeting you in person.
Yeah.
Thank you for
so
your
much.
time.
Yeah. Sorry we're out
Thank
of
you,
time.
guys.
But yeah.
Yeah, this flew by, and
It
thank you
did.
so much. I'm honored, and it was a privilege to be on
Look
the
forward
show.
to meeting you
So
in person
welcome.
someday.
Yeah.
Thank
Take
you.
great care.
Take
Bye-bye.
good care.
Bye bye.
Be well
care.
and have a fun surf.
That's right. Yeah.
Catch that wave.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.